You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers. I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Hoorah! Radical Rant. Welcome back, everyone. And of course, this Saturday, we were all stunned by the tragic news in Arizona of the assassination attempt on Representative Gabrielle Giffords and the death of 6 others, including a 9-year-old girl born on 9/11. And while this story has eaten up the airwaves, there's been a lot of talk about rhetoric and talk about Sarah Palin's bullseye map, where she tweeted, "Common sense conservatives and lovers of America don't retreat, instead reload," and then had a map with little bullseye targets all over the districts, including Gabrielle Giffords. We heard of Sharon Angle, the Republican running in Nevada, who said that the voters are starting to look for Second Amendment remedies. And there's been a lot of talk about this and the shooter and whether or not this influenced. And on the other side, there's people that will say, the guy's a nut. He's crazy. He's going to kill. He's going to shoot. He's going to go wild no matter what. You can't blame people. We have free speech in this country. It'd be like blaming Public Enemy for their song By the Time I Get to Arizona, or, anything like that. And while those explanations, either whether you think it's, insane Loughner psycho just lost it, or violent rhetoric leads to violence, whichever side you're on, that works for most people. But for some people, there just has to be a better scapegoat. And so whoever had less than 24 hours in the when will they blame this on marijuana pool, you just won, because on Saturday I got this from the Associated Press. Associated Press on Arizona suspect. Quote, former classmate described Loughner as a pot-smoking loner who had rambling beliefs about the world. His exact motivation was not clear, but a former classmate described Loughner as a pot-smoking loner who had rambling beliefs about the world. High school classmate Grant Weems, age 22, said Loughner seemed to be floating through life and doing his own thing. Quote, sometimes religion was brought up or drugs. He smoked pot, I don't know how regularly, and he wasn't too keen on religion from what I could tell, Weems said.
So you're saying that people self-medicate with marijuana, Russ?
Yeah, some people smoke pot. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Some people eat cereal, too.
Yeah, this guy, obviously a nut, obviously having some sort of schizophrenia or schizotypal disorder. Just if you checked out his YouTube videos, it's quite obvious. And yeah, maybe he was using marijuana to self-medicate. And on Huffington Post, we find a comment like this. Looks like my neighbor's kid. He wears long black raincoats. I've seen him strung out on the grass, carries a .357 Magnum in hand outside his house, walks with an attitude. Rumors have it that he has been in court for drug possession. Another endorsement for the medical marijuana lobby, I am sure. So I wanted to just address this sensationalism of bringing up whether or not Loughner smoked pot and trying to blame either his schizophrenia or his violence on that. Look, if Loughner is a 22-year-old male, all this tells us is that he's fairly typical. On the national surveys of drug use and health, if we drill down to just 22 and 23-year-old males, and I can't split it any finer than that, it's 22 to 23 in the little column, so that's the best I can give you. But for 22 to 23-year-old males, 56% have tried marijuana, 30% will use marijuana this year, 18% will use marijuana this month, and 6% will use marijuana almost every day. Okay, so if he was smoking pot, then he's no different than a whole lot of other 22 or 23-year-old young males who don't go on to kill anybody. Now, he does sound like the kind of person who should not be smoking pot. It's never a good idea for people with mental illnesses like schizophrenia to use cannabis. However, locking up mentally healthy adults who use cannabis in Arizona didn't stop Loughner from smoking pot, did it? In fact, it may have made it easier for him to do so. And one part that's really strange about this story is in Arizona, just last year, they signed a law that allows adults 21 and older to have a concealed firearm, a concealed weapon, without any sort of permitting. Now, I don't want to get into the whole gun rights discussion and whether or not that's a good or a bad idea, but don't you think it's a little odd that a state that can trust its citizens to walk around packing heat can't trust them to have a joint in their pocket? They'll still lock them up for 6 to 18 months if they catch them with marijuana. Doesn't that seem a little odd to you? I mean, what are we really more afraid of? People with guns in their pockets or people with joints in their pockets? Let's get real. Now, another example, just this morning I picked this one up. Another example of this media sensationalism comes from an unsurprising source, the Denver Post, which is in many cases shown an anti-marijuana bias. But this one just really got to me. It was a headline that came out from January 8th in the Denver Post, and here's the headline: "Marijuana found in system of man who died in Pitkin County fall." Oh, well, all right, let's check this out. I mean, the average person skimming through the headlines is going to see that and say, oh, man who died at a fall, he was smoking pot, he was obviously high, obviously it was an accident and he died, right? That's, if you were just skimming the headlines, that's what you'd think. But let's take a look at the whole story. What does the whole story say? A 28-year-old ski lift operator who fell to his death from a Pitkin County bridge had marijuana in his system, according to toxicology reports. The body of George Aldrich was found on December 13th after he went missing on November 27th. An area resident found the body under the Maroon Creek Bridge near where Aldrich got off a bus. The Pitkin County Coroner's Office said the final toxicology report from the investigation revealed the presence of THC, according to a Saturday media release. Aldrich also had a blood alcohol content of 0.294%, which is 3.5 times the legal limit for driving. Fifth paragraph, folks. Fifth paragraph before we get around to mentioning, oh yeah, the guy who fell off the ski lift to his death was drunk as a skunk. Yeah, he may have smoked some skunk at some point, but that's not what caused him to fall off the ski lift. Now, presence of THC. In the story, it says the investigation revealed the presence of THC. Now, that implies that it's THC detected in the blood, not metabolites detected in the urine. However, we don't know that, for sure, but still, even if it was THC detected in the blood, it tells us nothing about whether the guy was high at the time. THC can show up in your blood for up to 6 hours at detectable levels of 2 nanograms per milliliter or more. So, this is a problem with this reporting. And one of our normal board members, Paul Kuhn out of Nashville, Tennessee, replied to this and actually wrote to the reporter. The reporter's name is Kieran Nicholson. And if you visit the blog at stash.normal.org on this story, you can get this guy's email address. Paul Kuhn wrote to this guy to complain about the bias. Okay? And let me pull up my email here because I actually have the whole email chain. This is very, very interesting. Let's see. So Paul complained and said, stick to the facts. This is not about the THC. The THC in the system is irrelevant. Kieran actually replied. The reporter actually replied, and this is Kieran Nicholson's words in his reply. It's not misleading or inappropriate. It is a fact. The alcohol content in his system had already been reported. The coroner's office released the THC component, so it was new. It was the news. That's why the THC was the top of the story and the alcohol was below. Really? Really? Okay. Well, yeah, it was a fact that the guy had THC detected in his system, but was it a relevant fact? Is it a newsworthy fact? Is it worthy of making a headline in the Denver Post? This was noted by our board member, Paul Kuhn, who responded, the headline does indeed convey a fact. An irrelevant fact with no more meaning than if the coroner had found traces of nicotine, caffeine, or aspirin. Suppose the victim had been murdered. The headline might read, Body of murdered victim was discovered in Pitkin County. Then suppose we later discover the killer was gay. Would you run a headline saying, Pitkin County killer was gay? No, because the killer's sexual orientation had nothing to do with the murder. And marijuana had nothing to do with this person dying. So why does it merit a headline? Sensationalism. That's why. And that's exactly why the Denver Post went with this headline, because it was sensationalism. I got some later responses from Kieran. I'm going to pull these up. These aren't actually written up, so you have to give me a second while I find this. Kieran responds back, Paul, how do you know that THC had nothing to do with his death? I don't know that. I don't know how much THC was in his system. The coroner didn't disclose that. So I'll just stick with the facts. He had THC in his system, as well as alcohol. I think they are both worth mentioning when a young man falls to his death. Well, okay. Once again, though, the fact is that alcohol in high doses, and this is Paul responding again, alcohol, especially at high doses, causes severe incapacitation and reckless behavior. Cannabis does not, and according to most research, has a moderating effect on the destructive behavioral impact of alcohol. Although, as I commented earlier, it's unlikely any substance could reduce the impact of almost 0.30 alcohol. This is perilously close to a fatal level. Let me say it again, this guy was drunk out of his mind. To imply that marijuana had anything to do with the death of an individual who was almost fatally intoxicated, in my view, is bad journalism. Now, I also took the opportunity to respond to Kieran Nicholson at the Denver Post, and I wrote a pretty lengthy post, as I tend to do, with all my facts and figures and statistics and so on. And, I asked him, or he responded back to me, I don't know for sure that alcohol was to blame. You can guess that alcohol was to blame. I won't. I'll just stick with the facts as I know them. THC was in his system, as was alcohol. I know the specific amount of alcohol, so I used it. If I'd learned that cocaine or some other drug was in his system, I'd use it also. I can only report what I know. So I responded back to Kieran, was aspirin in his system? Benzos? Ambien? Would you report those? The only reason to report what might have been in his system is in support of the original story, which is the death by falling of someone. The original story notes that he had a 0.294 blood alcohol content. We've established that he was impaired by alcohol and that he fell to his death. If you didn't think alcohol contributed to the death, why did you report that? Because it isn't illegal to be shit-faced drunk, but you chose to report that fact, so I have to assume that reporting the alcohol part was salient to the news of the man's death. The marijuana was not salient to the man's death. The only reason you reported it is because marijuana is illegal. You didn't report whether he had aspirin in his system. You didn't report whether he had cough syrup in his system. It doesn't matter what he had in his system when we've already established a 0.294 blood alcohol content. Wouldn't matter what else was in his system. He was already drunk out of his mind. But this is that subtle bias that the media uses to continue the demonization of marijuana and its users. Another chance to take a little swipe at marijuana by publishing a headline that says marijuana was found in the system of someone who died in a fall. It wasn't relevant. You'd already reported that the man had died in a fall. What shows up on his toxicology report that is not incidental to what caused the fall or the inebriation is irrelevant and not newsworthy. It's just, once again, sensationalism for sensationalism's sake, another reefer madness headline to drive up circulation. Oh boy, well, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us here on the Daily Audio Stash. Stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. We'll take your calls on this at 971-53.